They said I wasn't strong enough to keep. 4 weeks later, I was dragging a dying wolf through the rain, and he turned out to be the one thing in this world that would never let me go. The first time I found him, the rain had been falling for 3 days straight. It turned the border woods into a misted graveyard, roots slick with moss, fog clinging to pine branches like the breath of something too tired to leave. I was hauling kindling back to the cabin when I saw the shape at the tree line, a heap of dark fur folded wrong against the earth, steam rising from the body into the cold morning air. I should have called the rangers. That's what the Ridgefall pack would have done. That's what they taught me to do before they said I wasn't enough to keep and left me bleeding on the claiming stones. But I didn't call anyone. Instead, I set the kindling down, pulled my cloak tighter, and whispered into the rain, "It's okay, I won't hurt you." The wolf's head lifted barely, and I froze. 2 milky white eyes stared in my direction. Not at me, not through me, but somewhere deeper, like he was reading the shape of my voice in the air between us. The growl that rumbled from his throat wasn't aggression, it was fear. I recognized that sound. I'd made it myself, metaphorically speaking, every time someone from the pack had tried to get close after the rejection. He was starving, scarred, blind, and I saw myself in every shattered line of him. My grandmother used to say, "Kindness to the broken heals the breaker." I wore her silver locket even now, tucked beneath my shirt where no one could see it. Inside was a scrap of paper with her last words to me, ink faded but legible. I'd never understood what she meant until this moment, kneeling in the mud with a dying wolf who couldn't even see me but somehow knew I was there. "You can't stay here," I told him, inching closer. "And I can't leave you to die." When I finally coaxed him onto the burlap tarp I'd dragged from the shed, he was lighter than he should have been, too light for something his size. Whatever had happened to him, whether illness, injury, or cruelty, had left him desperately malnourished. The scarring around his eyes wasn't fully healed. His blindness seemed relatively fresh, deliberate somehow, like it had been done to him rather than born into him. I pulled him home through the rain, one slow step at a time. Each time the makeshift sled caught on a root or stone, he'd whimper softly, and I'd whisper reassurances that probably made no sense to him. But maybe, I thought, it wasn't the words that mattered so much as the tone. The promise that pain wasn't all that remained in his world. The cabin had been my sanctuary for 2 years. After the rejection, after the pack made it clear there was no place for an Omega who felt too much, I'd come here to disappear. Nestled against the mountains, miles from the nearest neighbor, it was exactly the kind of isolation I'd craved. No prying eyes, no whispered condolences, no one watching as I slowly pieced myself back together. Now I was bringing a wild animal into the only safe place I had left. Madness, perhaps. But as I cleared a space by the hearth and lined it with old blankets, I felt something stir inside me that had been silent for too long. Purpose. "This is temporary," I told him as I gently transferred him to his new bed. "Just until you're strong enough to go back where you belong." His unseeing eyes tracked the sound of my movements as I gathered water, antiseptic, and the basic first aid supplies I kept on hand. The cabin was small, one main room with a kitchen alcove, a sleeping loft above, and this mudroom that smelled like pine sap and damp earth. The roof creaked when wind pushed through the valley. A single oil lamp flickered on the wooden table, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. When I approached to clean his wounds, his lips curled back to reveal impressive teeth, bone-white and sharp as daggers. I stilled immediately. "I understand," I said softly. "Trust has to be earned. I'll wait." I sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, simply existing in the same space, letting him acclimate to my scent and presence. The air around him felt different, charged somehow, like the pressure before a lightning strike. Eventually, his head lowered onto his paws. The tension never fully left his body, but it was progress of a sort. That night, I named him Aura, because something about the air shifted when he was near. Temperature, pressure, like a storm that refused to break. And because I needed to call him something other than the wolf. I slept on the floor near the hearth that night, unwilling to leave him alone in the dark. My back ached against the hard wood, but I didn't move to the bed upstairs. Through the hours, I heard his restless movements, the scrape of claws on the floor as he tried to map a world he couldn't see. Each small sound pulled at something in my chest, that old Omega instinct to soothe, to comfort, to make safe. Just before dawn, exhaustion finally dragged me under. I woke sometime later to silence. Complete, unsettling silence. My eyes flew open, heart hammering as I scanned the dim room. Aura lay exactly where he had been, but his head was turned toward me, those milky eyes fixed in my direction. His breathing had changed. It was no longer shallow and clicking. It was deep, steady, and somehow, impossibly, it had matched the rhythm of my own. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Two broken rhythms, sinking in the gray light of early morning. I held perfectly still, afraid to break whatever fragile thing was forming between us. The air hummed faintly, that strange charge I'd felt earlier now settling like a blanket over both of us. I didn't understand it, couldn't name it, but I felt it in my bones, the way you feel a storm coming hours before the first clouds appear. Something had shifted, something had begun. His eyes, still clouded and white, seemed to look straight through me to a place I didn't know existed. And for the first time since the rejection, since the pack had thrown me away like something broken and worthless, I felt seen. Not by sight, by something deeper. If you're feeling what Iris felt in that moment, if you know what it's like to be the one left behind, then you already understand why this story matters. And if you stay, if you see this through to the end, you might just find the part of yourself that's been waiting to be chosen. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story that doesn't look away from the broken things. Subscribe if you believe the rejected can become the irreplaceable. And share this with someone who needs to remember that being too much for the wrong people just means you're exactly enough for the right one. Week 1 was built on silence. I learned to narrate my life aloud, not because Aura understood the words, but because the quiet had been my only companion for too long, and speaking felt like proof I still existed. I talked about the weather, how the mist clung to the valley floor until noon, how the creek behind the cabin ran high from all the rain. I described the bread I was making, the way the dough felt under my hands, sticky and resistant. I spoke through my chores, hanging laundry on the line, sweeping pine needles from the porch, fixing the latch on the window that had been sticking since winter. Aura listened. He stayed near the hearth those first days, conserving strength, but his ears tracked every movement I made. On the third day, I set a wooden bowl of water near him and backed away. He didn't move. I went about my tasks, pretending not to watch, but I caught the moment he finally lowered his head and drank. The sound of his tongue lapping water was the sweetest thing I'd heard in months. By the 6th day, he was taking small pieces of cooked venison from my hand. His teeth never grazed my fingers. He was careful, deliberate, like he understood how fragile trust was between us. On the 7th night, I sat on the floor reading aloud from an old book of folklore I'd found in the cabin when I first arrived. My voice filled the space between us, and when I glanced over, Aura's head was tilted, listening with an intensity that made my breath catch. Week 2 brought change. Aura gained enough strength to stand on shaky legs. I expanded his territory, moving the chair and small table to give him more room, removing anything that might hurt him if he stumbled. He began to map the cabin, nosing the doorframe, the edge of the kitchen counter, the legs of the old rocking chair by the window. He moved with increasing confidence, memorizing the layout until he could cross from one end of the room to the other without hesitation. But it was something else that unnerved me. No matter where I stood in the cabin, even when I made no sound, Aura always faced me. Always. I could be at the stove with my back turned, and when I looked over my shoulder, his head would be angled in my exact direction. I could move from the kitchen to the mudroom, and his body would shift to follow. Not by sound, not by scent alone, by something else. The air around him still hummed with that strange charge, but now I noticed it grew stronger when I was near. The temperature shifted. The pressure changed. It was like standing too close to a lightning rod during a storm. I told myself it was coincidence. Wolves had keen senses. Maybe he could hear my heartbeat, feel the vibration of my footsteps through the floorboards. But deep down, in the place where instinct lived, I knew better. There was something supernatural about him. Something old. Week 3 arrived with warmer nights. I'd been sleeping on the floor near the hearth, my body aching from the hard wood, but unwilling to leave Aura alone in the dark. On the 17th night, I woke to the sensation of being watched. My eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim glow of embers in the fireplace. Aura stood over me. I should have been afraid. Should have remembered he was a wild animal, teeth and claws and instinct, but I wasn't. His head lowered, slowly, carefully, until his muzzle hovered just above my wrist where my pulse beat against the thin skin. He breathed in, deep and deliberate, then exhaled hot breath across my pulse point. The air between us thickened. He didn't lick, didn't nudge. He simply breathed me in like I was something precious he'd been searching for and finally found. The moment stretched, suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Then he turned and padded back to his place by the hearth, settling down as if nothing had happened. I lay awake for hours after, my wrist still warm where his breath had touched, wondering what invisible line we'd just crossed. Week 4 brought the storm. It rolled in at dusk, turning the sky from gray to black in minutes. Wind punched the tin roof, making the whole cabin shudder. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder cracked so close I felt it in my chest, and lightning turned night into day in violent stuttering flashes. I hated storms. They reminded me of the night the pack rejected me, when thunder had drowned out my pleas and rain had washed away the blood on the claiming stones. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed frame, arms wrapped around my knees, trying to breathe through the rising panic. Aura paced, restless, whining softly at each thunderclap. I watched him move through the cabin, sure-footed now, no longer the broken creature I'd dragged home through the rain. Then he stopped, turned, walked straight to me. Without hesitation, he crossed the room and laid his massive head on my knee. The weight of him was solid, real, grounding. I didn't think. My hand moved on its own, fingers sinking into the thick fur between his ears. He leaned into my touch, and something in my chest cracked open. We sat that way as the storm raged, two broken things holding each other together. Then lightning struck close, so close the cabin lit up like midday. In that flash of brilliant white light I saw it. The milky film in Aura's eyes caught the brightness, and for one impossible second, it looked like molten metal, like liquid gold pouring through clouds. The thunder that followed shook the windows. The light faded. Darkness rushed back in. But Aura's eyes didn't go dark. The white film was burning away, peeling back like fog under Sunday. Amber light bled through from some impossible place deep inside him, spreading, intensifying, until two brilliant gold eyes stared up at me with unmistakable awareness. Not the eyes of an animal. The eyes of something ancient, something that knew my name before I'd ever spoken it aloud. The cabin went very still. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. His mouth opened. Not a growl. Not a whine. Words. "Iris," he said, voice rough as gravel, deep as the roots of mountains. "4 weeks you kept me. Now let me keep you." The world tilted, and I forgot how to breathe. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a story about a girl and a wolf. And walking away now means you'll never know what happens when the one thing you saved turns out to be the only thing that can save you back. I dropped the bowl. It hit the floor with a dull crack, soup spreading across the wood in a dark stain that steamed in the cold air. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My breath came in short, shallow gasps that didn't bring enough oxygen. The wolf, Aura, the creature I'd been nursing for 4 weeks, had just spoken my name. "Iris," he said again, and the sound was like stone grinding against stone, rough and ancient and impossibly real. "I know you're afraid, but I need you to listen." "You can't," I whispered, backing away until my spine hit the wall. "You can't talk. Wolves don't talk. This isn't real." "I'm losing my mind." "You're not," he said, and his golden eyes held mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. "And I'm not just a wolf." He rose slowly, favoring his left side where the worst of his scars twisted like white rivers across dark fur. The air around him thickened, that strange charge I'd felt for weeks now crackling like electricity before a storm. When he spoke again, his voice carried weight, the kind that made you believe in things you'd spent your whole life being taught were impossible. "My name is Aura," he said, "and I'm a guardian shifter." The words meant nothing to me, everything to me. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, legs too weak to hold me upright. "Guardian shifter," I repeated, testing the shape of the words. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm old blood," he said, bred from the first packs, before territories and alphas and claiming circles. We walk the ley lines, the places where the world thins and power bleeds through. We keep watch. We guard the boundaries between what is and what should never be. I wanted to laugh. Wanted to scream. Instead, I just listened, because his voice was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned liquid. The hunters found me 3 months ago, he continued. They use witch metal, iron forged with dark craft that burns shifter flesh and severs the connection between human and wolf. They trapped me in wolf form and took my sight with heated blades dipped in silver. They wanted to break me, to make me tell them where the other guardians walk their lines. Why? My voice came out hoarse, broken. Why would they do that? Because mate bonds vibrate on a frequency they can track, he said, and something in his tone shifted, softened. True mate bonds are rare, Iris. When two souls recognize each other, when they braid together, the resonance throws a pulse that their machines can read. They hunt bonded pairs, harvest them, use their blood and marrow to power the very devices that track others. The horror of it settled over me like a shroud. But you said you were alone. You said they blinded you and left you. They thought they'd broken me completely, he said. They dumped me in the forest to die, but you found me. You brought me home. You cared for me when you had no reason to, when your own pack had thrown you away like something worthless. The mention of my rejection made my chest tighten. I'm not pack anymore. I'm nothing. You're everything, he said, and the words hit me like a physical blow. Your compassion, Iris. Your refusal to look away from broken things, it braided our sense together. You fed me, sheltered me, spoke to me like I mattered. And in doing so, you woke something that had been sleeping in my blood for centuries. The room spun. What are you saying? You're my fated mate, he said simply. The bond that should have taken years to form snapped into place in 4 weeks because you feel first and you never look away. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The pack had rejected me because I felt too much. Because the alpha's son had stood in front of the claiming circle and said I was too weak, too emotional, too soft to be kept. And now this ancient creature was telling me that the very thing they'd called weakness was what had saved him. Why me? The question tore out of me, raw and bleeding with all the pain I'd buried for 2 years. Why would anyone choose me? Aura moved closer, his massive head lowering until his eyes were level with mine. Because you feel first and never look away, he said. Because when the world told you to be hard, you chose to stay soft. Because kindness is not weakness, Iris. It's the rarest form of strength. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I don't understand any of this. You don't have to, he said. Not yet. But you need to know that the bond awakening has consequences. The hunters, they're closing in. They've picked up the frequency. The hum we're throwing is like a beacon in the dark, and they're coming to take us both. Fear spiked through me, cold and sharp. How long do we have? Hours, he said. Maybe less. As if summoned by his words, a sound drifted through the forest fog. Thin, high-pitched, barely audible but wrong in a way that made my teeth ache. A siren, wailing in the distance like the cry of something dying. The candlelight on the table trembled, shadows dancing across our faces as the sound grew closer. Aura's body went rigid, every muscle tensing. They're here. The siren hit like a knife to the skull. The pitch climbed higher, boring into my ears until I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Aura collapsed, his legs folding beneath him as the sound gnawed at something deep inside his bones. I watched in horror as his body began to convulse, muscles spasming under fur, steam rising from his skin as if he was burning from the inside out. Aura! I screamed, but my voice was lost under the wail of the siren. Then his body started to change. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't magical, it was brutal and wrong and horrifying. Bones cracked and twisted, reshaping themselves with sounds like breaking branches. His spine arched impossibly, vertebrae popping as they realigned. Fur receded into skin that tore and bled where the transformation pulled too hard, too fast. Light flared around him, gold and blinding like lightning trapped under flesh. I couldn't look away. Through the steam and the light and the horror, a man began to emerge. On his knees, chest heaving, scars crossing his torso like white rivers against tan skin. His hair fell to his shoulders, dark as his fur had been, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were still too bright, still burning with that impossible gold. "Don't look," he gasped, one hand raised to shield himself from my gaze. "Not like this. Not because they forced it. They don't deserve your first look at me." The words broke something inside me. Even in agony, even half transformed and trembling with pain, he was thinking of me, of boundaries, of respect. "I see you," I whispered, "and you're not broken." He closed his eyes, a shudder running through him. Then his body twisted again, bones grinding as he forced himself back into wolf form. The transformation was faster this time, but no less painful. When it was done, he stood before me, sides heaving, barely able to hold his own weight. "On," he said, his voice rough even in wolf form. "We have to run now." I didn't hesitate. I climbed onto his back, my hands gripping the thick fur at his shoulders, and he bolted. The forest became a blur of moonlight and shadow. Branches whipped past, tearing at my cloak, scratching my face. Behind us, the sound of drones buzzed like mechanical insects, their lights cutting through the fog in sharp blue lines. The siren wailed on, that high-pitched scream that made my bones ache and my vision blur. Memories crashed over me, unbidden. The claiming circle. The Alpha Sun standing before me, his voice cold as he spoke the words that ended my life with the pack. And under his words, that same frequency, that low hum they used to assert dominance, to make Omegas submit. The hunters were using the same sound, the same weapon. My hands tightened in Aura's fur, and something shifted. The gold light that had flared during his transformation pulsed beneath my palms, warm and alive. Aura's stride steadied, his breathing evened out. The pain that had been radiating from him dimmed. "I've got you," I whispered against his ear. "Just run." The light pulsed brighter, spreading from my hands to his shoulders, down his spine, threading through us like a living thing. The bond, I realized. This was the bond made visible, humming between us, knitting us together in ways I didn't yet understand. We climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing thin and cold. The trees thinned out, giving way to bare rock and patches of snow that glowed blue under the moon. The drones fell behind, their buzzing fading to silence. For a moment I thought we'd made it. Then we reached the mountain pass. Aura stopped so abruptly I nearly flew over his head. His body went still, every sense focused forward. I looked up and saw them. 3 figures standing in the narrow gap between 2 cliff faces, backlit by the moon, and on each of our chests, 3 red dots of light converged, steady and unblinking, laser sights. The ambush had been waiting for us all along. Subscribe, like, and share if you want to see what happens when the hunted decide they're done running. The 3 hunters stood like statues in the mountain pass, their bodies backlit by moonlight, faces hidden in shadow. Storm mist swirled around them, thick as smoke, turning the narrow gap between cliff faces into something from a nightmare. Behind them, mounted on a metal tripod, sat the siren rig, all black cables and copper coils that hummed with malevolent energy. The red dots on our chests didn't waver. Aura's body tensed beneath me, every muscle coiled tight. I felt the tremor run through him, the way his legs shook as he tried to stay upright. The siren frequency was lower now, barely audible, but it burrowed into bone and nerve, scrambling everything it touched. "Down!" One of the hunters called, his voice flat and cold. "Both of you, now." Aura took a step forward instead. His growl rumbled deep in his chest, a warning that said we weren't prey, we wouldn't go quietly. But then the hunter at the rig twisted a dial and the frequency spiked. Aura's legs buckled, his body collapsing beneath me so fast I barely managed to roll clear before hitting the ground. "Aura," I gasped, scrambling to him on hands and knees. His eyes rolled back, gold dimming to amber as the sound carved through him. Blood trickled from his nose, dark against gray stone. The lead hunter laughed, taking a step closer. "Guardian shifters," he said, like the word was a joke. "All that power and you break just like the rest." Something inside me snapped. I'd spent 2 years broken, quiet, accepting the world's verdict that I wasn't enough. I'd let the pack throw me away without a fight. I'd hidden in the mountains and called it healing when really it was just waiting to disappear. But watching Aura bleed on stone because of me, because our bond had lit us up like a beacon, I felt something older than fear rise up. Rage. The hunter with the pack was closest, 3 steps away, his attention on Aura. I lunged, not for him but for the gear strapped to his back. My fingers closed around something hard and rectangular, all sharp edges and toggle switches. The screamer module. I yanked it free and he spun, but I was already moving, thumbs searching for anything that looked like a control. I flipped a toggle. The sound that tore from Aura's throat was pure agony. He convulsed, claws scraping stone, and I realized with horror I'd made it worse. Wrong toggle, wrong frequency. I flipped it back, then hit the one beside it, and the world exploded with sound, not the high whine that had been torturing Aura. Something deeper, bone-rattling, a counterpulse that slammed outward like a shockwave. The lead hunter's grin curdled. He staggered, hands flying to his ears, and then Aura was on him. The fight was brutal and fast. Sparks flew where claws met the gunmetal plating on the hunter's vest. Aura moved through the mist like a shadow-given teeth, his body a blur of fur and fury. Another hunter raised a weapon, something that crackled with electricity, but Aura's jaws closed around his wrist and the gun clattered to stone. The third hunter ran. Aura let him go, turning back to the one beneath him. Blood stained the rocks. The siren rig sparked and died, its hum finally, blessedly silent. I dropped the screamer module, my hands shaking so hard I couldn't hold it anymore. It was over. Except it wasn't. The lead hunter, the one Aura had taken down first, was still breathing. Broken, bleeding, but alive, and he was smiling. That's what made my blood turn to ice. He was smiling like he'd won. "Too late," he rasped, blood on his teeth. "We already have enough." "Enough what?" I demanded, kneeling beside him, my voice shaking with adrenaline and fury. "Pairs," he said, "captured, caged. 23 bonded shifters in iron and nightroot, bleeding slow so the resonance stays strong." His smile widened. "Your frequency just confirmed you're active. You're in the system now." "Tagged. Tracked. They'll send more." The words hit like a physical blow. 23 bonded pairs. Held somewhere. Tortured. Harvested for their blood and marrow to power the very machines that hunted others, and we just added ourselves to their list. Aura shifted beside me, back to human form, still breathing hard from the fight. He was shirtless, scarred, eyes burning gold in the darkness. "Where are they keeping them?" he demanded. The hunter just laughed, a wet gurgling sound, and then went still. Silence crashed over us, broken only by the wind whistling through the pass and Aura's ragged breathing. I looked at him, this ancient guardian who'd been blinded and broken and thrown away, and something in my chest made a choice. "We're not running anymore," I said. He turned to me, surprise flickering across his face. "Iris." "They have 23 pairs," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. 23 bonds like ours, suffering because the hunters want to weaponize what should be sacred. I spent 2 years hiding because I was afraid. I'm done being afraid. "This isn't your fight," he said softly. "Yes, it is," I said. "You told me my compassion woke our bond. That feeling first isn't weakness, so I'm going to feel this. All of it. The rage, the injustice, every ounce of pain those captured pairs are going through. And then I'm going to do something about it." Aura stared at me for a long moment, and something like pride flickered in his eyes. "You sound like a guardian," he said. "I sound like an Omega who's tired of being told she's too much," I corrected. "Now get back in wolf form before you freeze." "We have somewhere to be." He shifted without argument, and I climbed onto his back. The horizon was beginning to lighten, dawn bleeding gray and gold over the mountain peaks. In the distance, barely visible through the mist, I saw it. A valley ringed by standing stones, ancient and weathered, catching the first light of morning, Hollowmere. We limped toward it, both of us bruised and half alive, but moving forward nonetheless. The standing stones rose from the valley floor like the bones of giants. Mist clung to them, catching the sunrise and turning everything gold and ethereal. Between the stones, figures moved, robed in gray ash and old leather. Guardians, I realized. Elders who still walked the ley lines and kept the old laws. They watched us approach in silence. Aura slowed as we entered the circle, his steps careful, reverent. When we reached the center, he stopped, and I slid from his back. My legs nearly buckled, exhaustion and adrenaline making everything feel distant and dreamlike. The guardians murmured among themselves, their voices low and concerned. I heard the words they whispered. Human scent. Omega. Bonded but not claimed. Impossible. Then I saw it. The bond made visible. Gold threads of light shimmering in the air between Aura and me, delicate as spider silk but strong as steel. They pulsed with our heartbeats, perfectly synchronized. An elder stepped forward, her face lined with age, eyes sharp as broken glass. She studied me, then Aura, then the threads connecting us. This is not the natural way, she said. Nothing about this was natural, Aura replied, and his voice carried the weight of centuries. He shifted then, bones reforming, body reshaping until a man knelt before the elders instead of a wolf. He didn't try to hide his scars, didn't flinch from their scrutiny. He simply held his head high and spoke words I didn't understand, syllables that tasted like stone and old earth, the old tongue. When he finished, he turned to me and repeated it in words I could grasp. Mine, he said, my mate, my bond, my choice across 4 weeks and 1,000 years of waiting. The gold threads flared brighter, and something else happened. The white film that had clung stubbornly to the edges of Aura's vision, the last remnant of the curse, cracked, flaked away like old paint. His eyes cleared, and for the first time since I'd found him bleeding in the rain, he could see me completely. The elder who'd spoken before moved closer. In her hand she held a thin branch of blackthorn, its tip sharp enough to draw blood. Iris Vale, she said, and I flinched hearing my full name spoken aloud. Rejected by Ridgefall. Cast out. Unnamed. Yes, I whispered. Will you accept a path that breaks pack law? She asked. Will you stand trial for crimes you have not committed but will be accused of nonetheless? Will you let your bond rewrite treaties written in blood and older than memory? I thought of the claiming circle at Ridgefall, the faces that had watched me bleed and said nothing, the Alpha's son who'd looked through me like I was glass. The years I'd spent believing the lie that I was too much and not enough all at once. Then I thought of Aura, blind and broken, trusting me when he had no reason to. The bond that had grown from kindness instead of being forced in firelight and ceremony, the 23 pairs still suffering in cages somewhere because people like me had been too afraid to fight. Yes, I said, and my voice didn't shake. I accept. The elder pressed the blackthorn to my palm. It stung, sharp and clean, and blood welled up dark against pale skin. Then you are witnessed, she said. Mate to a guardian, your exile ends here if you survive what comes next. The bond flared like heat shimmer rising from summer stone. Every wolf in the circle, guardian and elder alike, felt it. Heads bowed instinctively, recognizing something primal and old. Aura rose and crossed to me, his hand covering mine, his blood mixing with my blood where the thorn had cut. The first to feel is always the first to heal, he whispered, so quietly only I could hear. I wanted to stay in that moment forever, but the sound of footsteps broke the stillness. 3 scouts emerged from the tree line, breathing hard. In their hands they carried a map, hastily drawn but detailed. Red marks indicated a location deep in hunter territory. The eldest scout met my eyes. We found where they're keeping the prisoners, she said. But the facility is heavily guarded, a suicide mission for anyone who tries. I looked down at my marked palm, blood still fresh, then at Aura, whose eyes finally saw me clearly. Then we start tonight, I said. If you watch it to the end, then you have to encourage me for telling this well-crafted story. Please subscribe and like my channel, for it means a lot.